Survival games are a dime a dozen these days, and I play a lot of them, don't get me wrong. But Bellwright specifically combines systems and genres in a way that we haven't really seen a lot on the market, largely focusing on a blend of village building, economy management, and large squad combat from a third-person perspective. And I've completed Bellwright a few times since its release in 2024, and through the many patches, fixes, and content updates, I always end up returning to Bellwright. Now last year I did post a video comparing Medieval Dynasty to Bellwright, and while I do basically review both games in that video, Bellwright has changed quite a bit in the last year, and I thought it was about time to revisit this game in the form of a review 1 year later. So let's talk about if Bellwright is worth playing right now in its current state. The game opens up with you returning to your homeland after being on the run, having been blamed for the death of the prince by the now Queen of Carvenia. With the lands occupied by her thugs and brigands, your goal is to bring peace, liberate the lowlands, and make the villages prosperous once again. You start outside Herendeen, where you're told you can start building, as well as meeting your first villager Lubomir, a former trapper of Herendeen. As you prove yourself useful to Herendeen, you are sent to other villages around the map to help locals, build trust, and eventually defeat all of the brigands occupying each village. The game start has changed quite a bit over the course of its early access release. I wouldn't be surprised if more tweaks end up happening, but for the most part it's a solid start that easily gets you into the game, with the initial quest teaching you the ropes gradually before the game gets a lot more challenging. And it does ramp up relatively quickly once you start liberating multiple villages. But before you can get to this point, you need to start building. Now building is a little weird in Bellwright. I wouldn't say it's bad, but it's definitely a more unique approach to building and with its own issues. Buildings are placed by choosing a building and placing the schematic into the world, and when you do this, a little stockpile, which is mostly used by the villagers, will act as a location to drop off the resources required to build, though you the player character can directly put items on from your inventory. And then the building consists of clicking around the building location, adding building parts piece by piece. I remember thinking this was a little weird when I first played Bellwright, but it kind of grew on me, and it's kind of cool being able to see how much progress has been made on the buildings, especially on the later buildings, because as you progress to higher tiers, the buildings become larger, more expansive, and require carpenter hammers. Once you do reach this tier, building takes a lot longer. Building them on your own isn't really practical, so you need laborers in that instance. My biggest issue with building mostly has to do with placing buildings in the world. Especially for village building, hills and objects can easily obstruct placing things, or if you don't really have a plan ahead of time, you may have to move things around just so you can get your roads placed exactly how you want. And roads are important because they help you move around a little bit faster and cost you a little bit less stamina. Aside from wanting more lenient placements though, I think it works completely fine for what it's worth. Now you can't have a building game without a little bit of crafting, and crafting works a little bit different in this game, in that it takes a decent amount of time to craft items, especially if you're manually crafting. But if you use villagers, which is ultimately the goal, you'll have a lot more moving pieces, so it feels like things will get done a lot more quickly as you increase your population. Depending on the crafting station, crafting can be done by adding items into an object, for example the cooking pot, or by going to a bench like a weaver and crafting from there. In most workplaces though, you'll have an option to set up a queue for what you want your villagers to focus on, with separate settings like top up, which means they'll make them until they reach that number, or one-offs where they'll craft as much as you tell them, then remove that craft from their queue. I do wish crafting was a lot faster for the player regardless of the villagers being the main focus of crafting, and I'm pretty sure there's an option to change this with mods. Crafting is nice because it has more of a hands-off approach, which gives you more time to roam the world, fight bandits, or trade with the NPC villages. Also, sorry for the small interruption, but don't forget to pay that King's tax, 1 like or 1 sub y'all. It really helps the channel out, and I appreciate you. Speaking of villagers though, the villager system takes a bit more time getting used to with the priority system, which allows you to set which tasks villagers will do that are free based on a numbered priority that you can set once you hire them. For the most part, this will work seamlessly, and if you're having issues with your villagers working, 9 out of 10 times it's because you set up your priorities wrong or it's distance issues. It gets a little deeper with the workplace priorities, which matter more once you have buildings of the same priority type. In this instance, you can set your buildings by which ones you always want to be worked in first. I think in terms of villagers, they mostly work great, but I often feel like they're still a bit lifeless. They don't really emote, they don't talk, they don't have much of a story or personality once hired, which I guess isn't the worst thing in the world, but coming from games like Medieval Dynasty and even Conan Exiles, I'd like to see some more immersive interactions or systems involving the villagers. Unlocking better buildings, weapons, and armor is all done at a research bench, which you can also look at through the tech tree in your menus. If you want to determine what is researchable and what you need to research beforehand, villagers just require a few resources and some time, and that will allow them to research new items or buildings. Once you reach tier 2 though, You'll have a new research bench to work with, and some of the new research will require villagers with professions. So at that point, liberating villages becomes a lot more important. I don't mind researching in its current state, and I don't imagine we'll see it change much into the 1.0 release. But I wouldn't be surprised if more items, weapons, armor, and buildings are added as time goes on. Not too long ago, tier 4 buildings were added, and while these ones specifically haven't been researchable, we definitely need some more tier 4 buildings and research. Once you have a little foundation set up, from here on out, every outpost you will have a raid meter, which once filled will trigger a raid the next day. And if this raid is not defended against, the raiding party will go to your stockpiles and take a percentage of your resources. These raids start as easy and are frequent, but over time they will get stronger and the raids won't be as regular. Also, if you do fail a raid, it lowers the level, so you are given a bit of a break even though it is temporary. The raids are cool though, and you can get some really good loot from them, but if you've never been the type to like your bases getting raided, first off, this game's probably not going to be for you in the first place, but you can turn them off in the settings, along with changing a myriad of settings like durability changes, harder or easier raids, and much more. Similar to raids, you also have the NPC village liberations, which is one of the main objectives in Bellwright. Once you reach a max reputation with a village, you can build a bell tower, fight the occupying brigands, and defend the village from the upcoming brigand reclamation parties. These reclamation parties pretty much work the same as raids, but they target NPC villages only, but without a raid level. The difficulty for the reclamation parties is based on hostility, which increases as you liberate more and more villages. I think losing a raid isn't the end of the world, but a failed reclamation could be devastating, resetting your prosperity and destroying newly built buildings. The only interesting addition that I think could be added is to have the ability to pay the brigands or bandits off for a raid, just in case you're in the middle of something and don't want to deal with it. Because it's happened to me more than once where I was focused on setting up my villagers or priorities, and I'd have to drop everything entirely just to deal with the upcoming reclamation party. Another thing that's kind of annoying with reclamation parties is depending on what time it happens, especially if it happens at night. If you sleep as the reclamation party pops, sometimes you can wake up and your village has just been taken in the middle of the night. This has happened to me pretty rarely. This has only happened to me maybe once or twice, but still, it's still really annoying, and I usually just save scum, I'm gonna be real. Now, if you like economy-driven trading games, there's a whole lot of that you can take part in once you start building caravans for trading. Every village pretty much has their own separate economy with their workplaces that will generate items that they will then sell to you and the surrounding villages. Prices can also fluctuate depending on if a lot of resources of that type are currently being traded, so it's not always cost-effective to trade depending on the day. One way you can counteract that though is once you've liberated that specific village, is to construct more buildings inside the villages. Like I mentioned earlier too, you have caravans and markets of your own that you can build, so you can send your villagers off with carts to trade with your neighbors. Since your characters do manually have to walk to the village and back, they are vulnerable to attacks, so you can set caravan guards to protect your trades when you do them. The economy system has come a long way since this game started, and while I didn't like the changes initially, I definitely see the vision and I prefer the way it works now. Another system I think that is really cool and pretty useful is the Outposts, which allows you to build separate villages that have their own resources, villagers, and storages working independently from each other. The system is mostly used if your main village isn't near a resource that you might need at a given time, or if you decide you want or need a second base a bit further into the late game areas. With combat, obviously we have some weapons, but we have a few unique weapon types to suit your playstyle. For range, your options are bow and crossbow, with longbows unlocked much later. For melee, you have 1- and 2-handed varieties of swords, maces, axes, and hammers. On top of that, you also have daggers and polearms such as pitchforks and spears. Some of these weapons scale off of different skills like strength and agility, 1-hand or 2-hand, and some also have skill requirements to be used, but you do have a good variety to choose from. Personally, my favorite is going ranged and using the bow and eventually the composite bow. And for melee, I like maces like the Morning Star or the Winged Mace for armor piercing later on. I'll talk more about combat when we get to changes I'd like to see added, but overall, the directional combat system is serviceable, and ranged combat feels best in my opinion once you've leveled it up. Now, without spoiling the final areas of the game, Hallmare Isles is a separate area in the game with its own story, built with larger cities and built for larger scale combats. Outside of the story, the island feels a bit disconnected from the rest of the map, but it freezes your village in Carvenia while you're gone, so that is nice, so you don't have to think about it. I really do like this area for one thing though, and it's that this is where you're going to get a lot of the late game tier buildings, equipments, and some if not the best armors in the game. Most of the stuff is bought using different currency rather than gold, though you can make stupid amounts of gold in this area. Once you do get to this place, If you're not practically living here, you're going to be bringing back a lot of stuff to your main base. I'm not a huge fan about how the map is a little disconnected from the main map, but I understand it's more of a performance or a resource-based thing as to why they're not on the same area. But this does give me hope if they do have one map that's going to be separate, that maybe we'll see a couple more maps in the future as well. I've always been curious as to what is on that other side of the large river in the lowlands, so I hope one of these days we actually get to go over there. Now that being said, I do want to talk about concerns or changes that I'd like to see looked at before 1.0. For starters, one of the biggest things in the game right now is that obviously it's early access, it's not finished, and that's going to be a deal breaker for some people on the get-go. And I might be just assuming that we're going to fight her, but the main queen antagonist mentioned at the start of the game isn't even in the game yet at the making of this video. So I do hope before 1.0 we actually get to approach this lady. The next thing that I've never really liked from the start is the AI voice placeholders. I've never liked the sound of them, but thankfully they can be turned off, so if you're like me, you do have that. The devs have stated they plan to use real voice actors by full release, but I still think it's something worth mentioning. I do not like the sound of them at all. The next one I want to mention, which has been a problem for a long time in my opinion, are the character models, mostly the faces. The faces are super emotionless, generic, and a little uncanny with their wide-eyed stares. It's definitely gotten better for sure since their original version, but they still need some work in my opinion. Another thing that's not currently in the game, but I've heard rumors that should be coming, are mounts. A big request for this game has always been adding horses since the beginning of its release, and I think it's only a matter of time before they're added. My biggest worry for them is what their implementation is going to look like, and whether they'll be usable in combat or not. I hope by the time they are released, they'll add at least a little bit more map space to work with. Another note is limited companion control. When you do have a squad set up, companion control is certainly functional, but there are a lot of things that would be nice to change, whether it be formations, aggressive and defensive stances. I don't need it to be as extensive as Bannerlord, though I wouldn't complain if it was. I would definitely like more control of the companions, especially if they get the horses in. Lastly, let's finally talk about combat. I think combat is fine for the most part, but it's a little too floaty. Early this year, I finally checked out Bannerlord, which has a very similar combat system to this game. And what I really like about Bannerlord's combat is that the windup and swings feel like they have a lot more weight behind them, and the strikes have more of an audible punchiness to them. In terms of weapon types, I think melee needs the most improvements. It's not perfect, but I don't dislike it. The riposte system adds a bit of fun. When you swing in the same direction as the enemy, you can auto block and swing through, usually getting a free hit in. But if they want to add some more melee mechanics like a feint attack, a special heavy, it would definitely add some spiciness to combat. Recently we got the kicks, which are cool, but I don't think the punish window for them is big enough, so that could probably use a bit of a tweak as well. Like I mentioned earlier, I've always been more of a ranged fighter in Bellwright, but I also think the bow just feels better. You can feel the draw speed, the weight behind the shots. The crossbow also feels good too when you get a hit, though the reload speed is a bit too long for my liking. So in its current state, post maiden voyage, post console update, would I say this game is worth it? Without question. In single player, you can easily get 100+ hours of gameplay before reaching the end game, and I've really liked this game since its initial release when the game was a lot less polished and crusty around the edges, and it's impressive to see how far it's come. I'm really looking forward to see where the game comes once we reach 1.0, and if any of the problems that I have with the game are addressed by that time. And specifically to Donkey Crew, great job so far guys, I'm proud of y'all, keep up the good work. If you want to see how this game compares to Medieval Dynasty, or you want to check out some more Bellwright content, check out one of the videos on the screen here. Also, don't forget to pay the king's tax of 1 like or 1 sub on your way out. And until next time, thanks for watching, and take care.